Right, of course, this is a topic that we have been discussing recently. Young athletes are often celebrated for their discipline, talent and competitive spirit, but the pressure to perform can come at a real emotional cost. Today, we speak to Demi Rae Snyman, registered counsellor and student wellness services manager at Emeris, about why mental wellbeing must be prioritised alongside physical performance. Demi joins us now via Zoom. Demi, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Week in Review. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to get straight into it. What are you seeing among young South African athletes as it pertains to, pressure, performance, and, mental well-being, especially juggling those three?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you for the opportunity. I think we're seeing a lot of, increased pressure in young adults, young athletes to perform. Especially if we take South African sporting culture at the moment across our various sporting codes, we're seeing a lot of success within those various sporting codes. And I think subconsciously that naturally places a significant amount of pressure on young athletes, young adults, to essentially perform and do well. But I think essentially striking a balance between, whether it's academics, sporting codes, thriving holistically, we're definitely seeing an increase in that level of pressure that is being experienced at the moment.
So when you say that you definitely are seeing an increase in that level of pressure, Demi, why do you think that is?
It's just an increased level of exposure from a very young age these days, and I think pressure is either derived internally or externally, whether it's, unrealistic expectations that are placed on individuals, whether it's external forces, whether it's social media, whether it's various role models, where it's support systems. And I think that essentially is placing an increased amount of pressure.
I want to ask you two things in one here, Demi. Why is it important that success on the sports field does not come at the expense of a learner's emotional health? And when we talk about success on the sport field, we've got a lot of youngsters who are entering big spaces. They've been 15-year-olds at the IPL. The IPL is huge. We've seen 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds playing for the Springboks as well. These are very, very young individuals. And not only, what I've mentioned, but also how do we go ahead and manage this? What are some of the things that they can do to assist themselves in managing this?
Thank you, Nicole. So in terms of success, I think, like I said, I've already touched on, the importance and the amount of pressure that is placed on young individuals. I think it's important to separate who the individual is from what they do, and really allowing their personal identity to shape in a way that thrives on their own individual passion, pressure, ability to perform, that drive and that success, hunger to want to do well. Young individuals essentially between the ages, essentially 12 and 18, but I think right at the end of those developmental stages are really at an identity versus role confusion stage where increased pressure could significantly impact that and not allow an individual's own development to kind of, develop naturally and organically in a way that it should.
If we look at some of the key players in the life of these youngsters, we can look at their parents, we can look at their coaches, and I mean just parenting itself. There's no handbook to this. You take it as it comes, and you learn along the way. However, unfortunately, sometimes youngsters are in a position where they do face pressure also coming from their parents or coming from their coaches, coming from their peers as well as other people. What are some of these types of pressures that they face, and what little bit of advice can you give to these parents to ensure that, we're looking at more positive competitiveness and not negative pressure?
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to encourage conversations around mental health, to encourage conversations around pressure, performance, how are they coping, what are they doing? It's important to essentially lend a listening ear, create a psychologically safe environment, and to talk about additional support measures that are available for young individuals to reach out. So often it's perceived as a weakness, and so often it's perceived as, a way that you're not coping or not thriving. But essentially it's the absolute opposite, where to seek that level of support enhances personal growth and development. So I think it's important to celebrate the small wins, not necessarily the, highlighted ones or the most important ones, but those that almost seem insignificant. Celebrating those small wins really boosts self-esteem and it boosts self-confidence. In essence, obviously has a very positive impact on their well-being in its entirety. So I think there's a lot that can be done. Parents, coaches, including psychoeducational workshops in various training schedules, talking about these kinds of things and being able to emotionally regulate is one of the most important things.
When you speak about lending an ear, I just quickly want to touch on our boys, because even in this day and age, there is still a strong message that they must be tough. So they might have people around them that are very comfortable and very happy and willing to lend them a listening ear. However, they aren't comfortable enough to go ahead and express themselves. That view is still there that men should be tough, whereas for a girl child, it's different, because as we grow up, we're always told, oh, women are more emotional. So how do our boys go ahead and, change this narrative, or rather, how do the people around them go ahead and change this narrative so that they too feel more comfortable to go ahead and speak up when they need to?
So there definitely is that expectation and that stigma placed on young boys, but I think pressure in general is placed on all young athletes who are playing at a competitive level. There is an expectation of young boys specifically, to answer your question, where they need to be strong, they need to be emotionally resilient, they need to be competitive, they always need to be at the top of their game. And I think it's about not necessarily just the athletes, but I think it's also the support system and the people around them to be able to hold them accountable, to know when they're not okay, to identify, to find those warning signs when they can see they're physically and behaviorally they're starting to act out, for example. It's knowing when and how to react and to respond in a manner that is comfortable for that specific individual, but not necessarily imposing in a way that takes control.